Well, joining us right now is the Auditor General of Canada, Karen Hogan. Ms. Hogan, thank you for joining us this evening.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Listen, I want to begin with the basic dollar figure here, because when you talk about the ArriveCan app, when it was first announced, it was supposed to cost tens of thousands of dollars. Instead, we're looking at tens of millions of dollars, $59.5 million, according to your report. You yourself say this is only an estimate. Just how much of a mess were the receipts and invoices here?
Well, this is an estimate, and it is based on the fact that the financial records were very poor quality. At times, we saw that basic information in invoices wasn't available when a resource works on an IT project, and there were many IT projects going on at the Canada Border Service Agency at the time. It wasn't clear if the individual worked on ArriveCan or another project, and so it makes it really difficult for someone who is allocating costs in the financial system to send them to the right project. So we had to at times back our way through several journal entries and end up at a task authorization to see whether or not it related to ArriveCan. It is possibly some of the worst record keeping I've seen in a long time. Just lack of good financial management controls.
Worst public figures keeping with public dollars. Could the final figure exceed $59.5 million?
The figure could be a little bit higher, but could also be a little bit lower, right? It really is unclear at times when there was some general IT contract work, how much should be allocated to ArriveCan or none at all. So many of the vendors, may not have believed that they actually worked on ArriveCan, but their costs were allocated in the financial systems by the Canada Border Service Agency, and hence we've reported them as part of the cost of this application.
Okay. Now, listen, I want to get your response or your thoughts to a couple of the points that were raised today, because Iqra Khalid, who is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Revenue, she asked you whether it would have cost more money to maintain the paper system instead of creating this app, even if it cost nearly $60 million. Was there any value in this money spent?
So I could highlight two things when it comes to value. There was value during the pandemic, and then there's an enduring value. And all of that is couched with overall, I believe that the public service did not get the best value for money that they should have received. This application did cost too much. But at the start of the pandemic, if you recall some of our reports in 2021, we said that the ArriveCan application actually helped to improve the quality of the information gathered at the border when people were entering Canada, as well as the timeliness of that information. You may recall that when it was paper format, at times the Public Health Agency of Canada wasn't receiving traveler contact information until about 28 days later. And that's really difficult to follow up on a 14-day quarantine when it is, weeks after that quarantine. There is an enduring value right now in that the Canada Border Service Agency used the development of this application to sort of springboard and automate the custom and immigration form, which is something that they were trying to do before the pandemic.
Now, we also heard that as terms of a context or argument that this money did go out in the midst of a pandemic, as you noted yourself, and the app was developed and delivered quickly. Are those mitigating circumstances to consider when you look at the dollars here?
So you're right that the application was delivered very quickly. It was record time, really, that the app was out there to support measures at the border. But the Secretary of the Treasury Board made it clear at the start of the pandemic that while the public service had to act quickly to support Canadians, they could streamline processes and eliminate some of the hoops that they normally would jump through, but they should always document and demonstrate prudent use of public funds in order to be accountable to Canadians. I don't believe that an emergency is a reason to throw the rules out the window. And what's missing here are some real basic elements that should be there. It was really a glaring disregard for some of the most basic things that the public service traditionally does well.
Mm-hmm. Now, you also write in the report that the decision to work with external resources and the continued reliance on them through this project actually increase the cost of the ArriveCan app. Can you maybe build on that, and whether or not we should keep that in mind? Because there is, as you know, a lot of debate right now in Ottawa about going outside of the public service.
So the decision at the start of the pandemic, the two agencies had assessed that they did not have the capacity or the skills to develop the application. And so it was reasonable at that time to go to a third party and have the application developed. What I would have expected over time, however, was that dependence and reliance on third parties would have been diminished for a few reasons. One, it would have ensured better value for money, keeping the costs lower as time progressed, but also to see a bit of the transition of either maybe the operations or some of the skills to the public service. And I think that's one of the things going forward that the public service has to really turn their minds to, is while contracting out for professional services at times it makes sense, how do they ensure that they've upskilled public servants so that that long-term dependency is on the public service and not on third parties?
Okay, it's interesting. You and of course you were looking at the public service, but I do wonder, as someone who has been looking at all the documents, going through the paper trail as you have done, where does the buck stop for you? Because yes, there's obviously issues around the public service, but what about the political level where decisions are made? How do things have to improve there?
When you go back to the start of the pandemic, the political realm decided all of the decisions around the Emergency Act and what borders should be, measures should be put in place at the border. It's then up to the public service to operationalize those and to put them forward. And so we really focus in, and that's where my mandate is, to focus in on the activities of the public service. How well do they carry out the laws or the decisions made by the political arm? And what we saw here is really a disregard for some of the most basic things that you would expect to see when it comes to project management. So, for example, I would have expected to see a good governance structure set up with an accountable party that provides oversight and a budget. And those elements were not part of the start of this project. So it's really difficult to manage to a budget when you don't have a budget.
Karen Hogan, Auditor General of Canada. I know you've had a busy day and continue to have a busy evening. Thank you for this.
Thank you.